Hi, I'm Christine Milne. I'm a director of the Bob Brown Foundation and a long-time advocate for the transition to 100% renewable energy and bringing down Australia's greenhouse gases as quickly as we possibly can. And in that capacity, I'm delighted to be here today to launch a new report, a report called Project Marinus and Battery of the Nation, Wrong Way, Turn Back. This report was commissioned by the Bob Brown Foundation and was done by the Victorian Energy Policy Centre, in particular Professor Bruce Mountain and Stephen Percy. It finds, as we expected, that Project Marinus and Battery of the Nation are not needed, are not greenhouse gas friendly, and will land Tasmanians up with higher energy prices.
Hello, and thank you very much for the introduction. Let me briefly say a few words about the Victorian Energy Policy Centre before I launch into the presentation of our report. My name is Bruce Mountain. I head up the Victorian Energy Policy Centre. We are a centre specialised in energy economics, consisting mainly of economists and engineers, and energy policy in the mainland of Australia, as well indeed of Tasmania, is our specialism. We're very pleased to be involved in this report to assess the economic and greenhouse gas implications of the extension or the proposal of 2 DC cables between Tasmania and Victoria and the construction of the battery of the nation. Let me launch into a slide pack which will set out the essence of our report. Firstly, what is Marinus Link and Battery of the Nation? The Marinus Link is a proposed 2 set of cables, 2 separate cables, 750 megawatts of cables. They are subsea DC cables, obviously. They're going to cross the ocean from northwest Tasmania to Gippsland in eastern Victoria. Being DC cables, they will convert the current at either end from an oscillating signal to a DC signal. And it's worthwhile mentioning there will be substantial on-land transmission augmentation in Tasmania to make it possible. The Battery of the Nation is an upgrade to the generation capacity of the existing Hydro Tasmania hydro generation in phase 1. And in phase 2 is the construction of pumped hydro generation, which means putting a generating unit in the mountains to pump water from a dam at the lower areas up to an upper reservoir and letting that water, once pumped, run through again to generate. What were we asked in this consultancy? We were asked on the economics of Marinus Link and Battery of the Nation. That means, is it viable economically? Is it going to generate the revenues that will pay for the outlays? And secondly, what is the impact of Marinus and the Battery of the Nation on electricity prices? We were also asked to consider the greenhouse gas impact of the developments. How will Marinus and Battery of the Nation work? Essentially, Marinus and Battery of the Nation will extend the operating regime between Tasmania and Victoria that Basslink makes possible now. And the essence of that operating regime is that Tasmania buys electricity from Victoria when the Victorian prices are low, when Victorian coal generators are setting the prices. And it sells that electricity back to Victoria when the Victorian prices are high, which is when gas generators are setting prices. Basslink mainly imports electricity in the summer. It imports much less in the winter, exports mainly during the winter. But this is the operating regime on a day, whether in summer or in winter. The augmentation of Battery of the Nation and Marinus will replicate and extend this trade. It is effectively storing coal-fired electricity generation from Victoria and selling it back to Victoria. However, we recognize, it is argued, that having a dispatchable source of power, which means a source of power that can be turned on and off at will, does not depend on the wind or the sun, is necessary in the transition to clean energy sources. And it will need to take the place of coal-fired generation in due course. So storage of some form is an important part of the transition, although during the transition, for the foreseeable future, it in fact will increase greenhouse gas emissions. Are there alternatives to Marinus and Battery of the Nation? There are two main alternatives. A third possibility, which we haven't listed here because it's likely to play a much more smaller and more complex role, is getting customers to change their demand, to get demand to follow supply rather than the other way around. But that's very much harder to do. The two alternatives are either gas turbines or engines, which can be dispatched quickly to increase generation, or alternatively batteries. And an alternative to having the Marinus link, the extension from Tasmania to Victoria, is to locate these alternative generation sources in Victoria. How do the alternatives compare? Gas is typically more expensive to build now than batteries. The Australian Energy Market Operator produces build cost estimates, which they use in their own views of the change of the generation system. And their assumptions show it is more expensive to build gas-fired generators than to build batteries. And it's much more expensive to operate gas-fired generators than it is to operate batteries. And so gas-fired generation is increasingly not a credible competitor to batteries. And we have dispensed with including it in the analysis for that reason. What we find in our study is that locating batteries in Victoria using the Australian Energy Market Operator's assumptions of battery costs will be less than half the cost of the Marinus cable alone. It's important to bear in mind that Marinus cable it can't do the battery of the nation job on its own. It is merely a conduit. And so to find that batteries are around half the cost of the Marinus cable alone is to indicate an enormous advantage of batteries compared to the total package, which is the Battery of the Nation plus the Marinus line. What we find in our study is that long duration storage, for as long as the Australian Energy Market Operator has modelled the system up to 2042, is not valuable. It may be that at some future point, longer duration storage is valuable, and technology change may well, and indeed is very likely to find that batteries could meet that need, if indeed it does actually arise. And the energy market facts and figures on wind and solar entry and the change in the operating demand find that having a long generation storage is not necessary. So what are the economic implications of batteries rather than Marinus and the Battery of the Nation? Firstly, most significantly, customers, and it might be taxpayers if the Commonwealth government chooses to bear it, they avoid $3.5 billion of network augmentation expenditure, which will be imposed on consumers through regulated network access charges. This expenditure need not occur. There are competing suppliers of batteries that will provide a storage service. We can get equity providers to face and bear the risk of installing batteries rather than getting customers or taxpayers to, by regulation, take on a much heavier cost burden. We also find relatively, because you're not augmenting the cable between Tasmania and Vic, there'll be relatively more wind generation in the mainland than Tas. However, should Tasmania pursue a strategy to continue to expand wind and solar to meet Tasmanian energy needs, it may well be that this strategy might not mean less renewable expansion in Tas. What are the greenhouse gas implications of batteries rather than Marinus? While coal generators are operating, Batteries generally, whether they are chemical or pumped hydro, will be storing coal-fired generation. The important point to understand here is wind farms and solar farms generate electricity when the wind and the sun is available. The additional generator that you dispatch to store your electricity will be when power is in fact the cheapest and you can't control the wind and the sun. You will be dispatching and storing coal-fired power. However, the greenhouse gas impact of batteries will be likely considerably lower than of Marinus and pumped hydro because transmission losses are much lower. You do not need to ship electricity from Victoria to Tasmania and back from Tasmania to Victoria. You can put your various batteries much closer to the point of use, which decreases the losses of batteries in the transmission network. Secondly, in operation, batteries lose much less electricity in the conversion process from storage to generation than pumped hydro, which incurs substantial friction losses in the pipes in pumping electricity and reproducing it. Thirdly, there's the ability to co-locate batteries with wind and solar farms. And in that case, they will be storing wind and solar production that otherwise would not be sold on the market. And indeed, this is exactly what we are seeing, where most major wind and solar farm developments are now coming with batteries at the point of the power generation, the wind and solar farms. And in that sense, batteries will be storing clean energy, not coal. In summary, that draws out the main points of our study. There's absolutely no doubt in our minds that the Marinus link and the Battery of a Nation will be very considerably more expensive, wasteful expenditure, which need not occur, and greenhouse gas emissions, which are entirely avoidable. Thank you.
So, Bruce, a lot of what the Minister and the Prime Minister are saying about Project Marinus and Battery of the Nation relates to jobs in Tasmania. From what I can see, really there would only be a few construction jobs, and then there's the ridiculous cost of this project. What's your take on the jobs angle?
There are 2 points I would make on jobs. Firstly, the vast bulk of the cash that will go out the door on these projects will go to foreigners, either installing equipment or mainly to construct the equipment. Very little of it will be spent in Tasmania or Australia generally. Secondly, when you create an investment in a project that doesn't pay its way, you create a deadweight loss. Someone needs to bear that. That weighs everyone down. It drives costs up in the economy. And households and businesses need to pay that. They employ people. And when you load them with expenditures that are not efficient, they have less ability to employ people. This is a job wrecker, absolutely a job wrecker, not a job creator. And to count the few jobs during construction is myopic and frankly silly.
Well, that's pretty much confirms what I think, and it's also been our experience of a lot of these projects in Tasmania. But on another issue, a lot of the climate activists and renewable energy activists throw up their hands when you say that this project is not economically viable and shouldn't proceed, the mainland doesn't need it. And they say, but I thought you were an advocate for reduced greenhouse gas emissions. Clearly, Project Marinus and Battery of the Nation will reduce emissions. In fact, Bruce, they'll increase emissions, won't they?
Yeah, I must say, I really find it difficult to understand that the initial reaction is that. I think it's because people associate with the word hydro a renewable resource. But it's important to understand what's going on here and how Hydro Tasmania interacts with Victoria now. Hydro Tasmania buys electricity from Victoria when it's cheap and sells it back to Victoria when it's expensive. That's the daily operating regime. The electricity that it buys is coal-fired generation. Wind and solar farms produce when there's wind and sun. They do not wait on Hydro Tasmania to say, please can we pump, or please can we withhold water. And all that Marinus does is it extends this. It makes it a bigger opportunity. It creates demand for the coal-fired generators, not for the wind or the solar. This is a coal-fired generation storage opportunity. Now, it is true to say that all storage during the transition are exposed in this way, but batteries have a much lower impact for several reasons. One is they are usually located much closer to the point of load. Secondly, they have much lower losses in the process of storage and regeneration. And thirdly, many batteries, indeed most batteries now, are co-located with wind and solar farms. And so if there's a transmission constraint that stops the wind and solar production actually getting to the market, you can use that and put it in a battery. And in that sense, it is 100% clean. So there is just no doubt at all that if greenhouse gas is your concern, batteries are far superior solution. And Marinus, Link, and Battery of the Nation are just not. I think the environmental movement needs to have a more sophisticated understanding of the association of greenhouse gases and the word hydro. The fact that it's hydro has got absolutely nothing to do. It's a coal storage solution.
And another question that comes up, and hydros say, oh yes, well, we sort of concede that under 8 hours of storage, batteries might have an advantage over us. But hydro are arguing that when you have penetration of, say, 60 or 70% of solar and wind into the national electricity market, you're going to desperately need Battery of the Nation, because Tasmania's hydro can store energy for up to 12 hours. Now, in your report, you say that, well, basically we don't need storage of more than 4 hours, but even if you did, by the time Battery of the Nation comes online in 2028, 2030, batteries will have reached that capacity, or even Portland, Victoria aluminium could act as a battery. So what's this issue that hydro imagine they've got competitive advantage because they say they've got 12 hours? How quickly do you think that that is just going to be demolished as an argument and in reality?
So I have 3 comments here. Firstly, if all you can make is a tram, then you say the right transport solution is a tram, when in fact a bus can do the job. We quite simply don't need long duration storage. We've modeled it using AEMO's numbers, and that long duration storage is just not needed. Secondly, I found when Tas Networks was answering concerns about Marinus Link by the Tasmanian I think it's a small business council, their response was to cost 8-hour batteries. We've included the cost of 8-hour batteries as an option. We don't think 8 hours is even necessary. 8 hours is still cheaper than just the cable alone, even leaving the Battery of the Nation. Thirdly, batteries are evolving very quickly. All storage types are. Right now, they are mostly in the 2 to 4 hour range. Battery developers are rapidly developing longer duration storage, which is not a big deal anyway. A 2-hour battery means you operate at your peak production for 2 hours, or half your peak for 4, or a quarter of your peak for 8, or a 16th for 16 hours, and so on. So it's simply the battery design and the economics. And the reason battery developers haven't brought it to market is because there's not a market need for it. And we've modeled AEMO's numbers out to 2040, and there is no market need for it. When there is, they will be there. And like they are now, for a fraction of the cost of pumped hydro.
It looks like whichever way you look at it, whether it's on economics, whether it's on whether the mainland needs renewable energy from Tasmania or storage of renewable energy from Tasmania, any which way you look at it, Marinus and Battery of the Nation just simply can't cut it. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, it is quite interesting to even have the conversation now. Right now in Australia, in California, in Britain, in Europe, battery is the default storage choice. That's what's happening. We've got 5 already, and I can point to another 10 being proposed with every wind and solar farm. Real investors are putting their money in them right now. This is somewhat of a debate in the weird political world that we're in, where these ideas even are being discussed as if they are challenging and new. Just look what's happening in the market right now. It's not controversial. All that we've done is we've used the publicly available data from the Australian Energy Market Operator to make the point in the public domain. But really, this is not a revolution. And I think those environmental groups and others that have not twigged onto it really ought to.
Once again, we're going to see Tasmanians burdened by ridiculous debt levels and higher prices because the people making the decisions really didn't understand what's happening in the real world of energy.
Yes, I think they've failed to grasp the advantage they have. Tassie has a fantastic advantage as an island, a true clean and green potential leader. Joining up to Victoria is not an advantage. It doesn't make you cleaner and greener. Things have changed. The world has moved on. Those technologies that Tasmania thought were valuable, pumped hydro, they never were. The last pumped hydro in Australia was built 40 years ago. The private sector hasn't come close to it anywhere. That ship has moved on. But the advantage of hydro endowment in Tas exists and should be used for the Tasmanian people.
So there's a great future here, and I've always argued that we should use our renewable energy as a competitive advantage because we've got more than we need. We're in that luxurious situation that virtually nowhere else in the world is, with more renewables than we need. And so we could electrify our transport system, we could electrify agriculture, we could actually look at encouraging those 21st century industries that are energy intensive and say, okay, we can actually locate you here. That is a far better strategy as a flagship in the global energy conversation than going down the path of locking ourselves into coal for another 20 years.
I think there's just no doubt at all that that's the right strategy. In so many goods and services industries, being able to tell your customers that the electricity that developed your product was clean and green is very valuable. It's a market advantage. And that's where Tasmania should grab the opportunity to ensure electricity, clean electricity, can be used to power those products and goods and services. They will command a premium in the markets that they are selling in. Go for it. The rest of Australia doesn't have that advantage. We struggle with an endowment of coal. Tas is free of it. Get on with it.
That's a great place to finish. So thank you, Bruce. Your report is excellent. The Bob Brown Foundation is very pleased that you have been able to do this work that we have asked you to do. And I think it's going to be a great contribution to the public debate, and hopefully it will head off a ridiculous waste of money that is so unnecessary, and that 7.1 billion diverted to a project that's not necessary can be used for the benefit of the nation. So thank you very much, Bruce.
Super, thank you. It's been a very great honour to work on this. And I hope that the advantages are obvious to all those, and that Tassie can seize the future. Thank you.
So now you've heard it from the experts. In fact, Australia's leading experts in energy economics and analysis. And they are saying that Project Marinus and Battery of the Nation are unnecessary, uneconomic, will end up as stranded assets, and will result in higher prices for Tasmanian consumers. It makes no sense. I'm asking you to go to the website, have a look at the report, read it through, and then contact all the decision makers you can and tell them we do not want $7.1 billion of taxpayers' money diverted from doing good things for the environment, from producing hospitals and schools around the community, and wasting it on projects that just don't stack up. Thanks very much, everyone.